Today I want to talk about how I make these brush holders. Now this is the first one I made. I made this back in 2012. Made out of a remnant that I had left over from a project. Simply because I needed something to manage my brushes, and that's what I came up with. So I thought about how to best hold brushes in a compact space and still allow your fingers to be able to grab them. So I came up with this compound angle that you see if you look down on it. And that seems to splay them out nicely so that your fingers can grab them and get a hold of them. This is one I just recently finished, and it hasn't changed very much. I still got that angle. And you can see the holes are very nicely equally spaced. This holds 21 brushes. There's 12 on the outer ring and 8 on the inner ring. And then of course the one dead center, which is a nice place to put a big brush or something that you feel has significance. Here's a blank ready to turn. This is made out of a piece of poplar with a piece of embuya on there, which is an interesting wood in one respect, because if you like the smell of camphor, when you start to turn it, that's what it smells like. And I particularly like that, so I use it on occasion. It's nice contrast with the poplar. And you see here I've got a pocket hole drilled with a Forstner bit, 2 1/8 inches. That will give us our first step. Making the blank like this is, I'm sure, not too challenging for anyone, so I'm not going to go into that in depth. But I do want to take you through the process I've come up with for turning these sort of in a production manner. And in particular, we're going to talk about how I make these holes. So to jump ahead, I'm going to show you a little bit of the setup for drilling these holes. So we come over here, and here is my drill press. Unfortunately, there's a light behind it, but that's no big deal. You can see I've got the table tilted. That's a 10-degree angle. And I've got a rotary table mounted on a piece of wood for 2 reasons: to help in positioning with these clamps on the drill press table, and also to give clearance for that crank, which is how you turn the rotary table. The rotary table has the advantage, if you see that ring, it's a degree ring. And that allows you to accurately position anything you put on it in a degree at a time if you wish. In this case, I've got it rigged out with a adapter here, which will screw into the chuck I'm going to use to mount the blank for the brush holder. That will position it accurately on dead center. What it won't do is hold it from rotating. So when I screw it on there, I can screw it on and off by hand, and that could be a problem when you start to drill. So I made this ring, and I made that really out of a piece of 2x6. That clamps onto the table with these screws, but in particular these screws that I put in on the side, there's one on the other side there, will grab that chuck body and clamp it in position so it won't rotate. So what this does for me is allows the turned blank to be dead center and clamped properly. And when you see that in action, those details will become self-explanatory as to why you want that. So now let me set the camera up, and we'll get to the lathe, and we'll start turning that blank for step 1. As you can see, I've got the chuck on the lathe now. We're ready to go to step 1. I've got the 2-inch dovetail jaws on, and we're just going to mount this guy on there and take the first step. The first step is going to be simply to true up the pardon me, the outside and to face off the top. And the facing off will go in 2 steps. Well, that sounds terrible. The first step will be now, and then we'll drill the holes. And then the second step will take place. And the reason for that is, I found that if I face this off after I drill the holes, the edges of the holes are guaranteed to be nice and crisp and clean. So let's turn on the lathe here and get this underway. This step goes pretty quick, so hopefully it won't be too boring. And about one more pass, I think. And that's good for the outside. And of course we can come back later and put a little design on that and just make sure that it's just true right now. And now I'm going to face this off first, and then I'll put a small detail on that we'll talk about. So what I've done there is that's about where the first ring of holes is going to go. I've just established that as a sort of a visual anchor point. And we're going to now go to the drill press and do that aspect of it. And like I say, once we're done with that, then we can go and put some kind of design in the outside edge. I just put something, whatever comes to mind at the moment. Couple rings or something, but we'll talk about that later. Okay, well, now that we're off the lathe, I noticed that there's one thing I didn't make really specifically clear. When I said we're going to take it off and go to the drill press, what that means is you take it off on the chuck. You leave it all intact and you take it off the lathe. Now you see this will engage nicely here. That's how this is all stacking up. So I'll screw this in position till it stops. Okay, now that I know that this is perfectly on center with what it was on the lathe, now these get screwed in. And I screw it in finger tight, and then I go about a quarter turn or so on each one to balance out the forces. Now I can't turn this out. Okay, I think I have to move you back a little way so you can get a better image of what I'm doing here. Yep, there we go. Hope you didn't get sick with that. Okay, so now it's on the drill press, ready to go, except positioning, and we'll get to that. I use 11/32 drill bit, and I go down about 2 inches in. So those are the points that we set up first, and I'm going to set this up to do the outer ring first, just to illustrate another point as we get to it. So I'm going to loosen these clamps up. So this allows me to move this about. And now I'm going to position it for the first set of holes. The holes, as you saw, were on an angle. They're actually on two angles. They're on the angle relative to center line, and they're on an angle relative to the radial line, which means that they splay out. To get that effect is a matter of how you position the drill. Now clearly this is 10 degrees, so that puts them on that angle relative to the center line of this turning. To get them to splay out is where this drill falls fore and aft on the turning. The more I go this way with it, with the drill entry point, the more it'll splay the brushes out. So I want to take this and drop it back a little bit so that it's going to splay those brushes out. And that's all there really is to that. No extreme magic, but it is an important point. The positioning is what gives you the final result. Okay, now, as for position on the piece, I can move this a little bit to make sure I have enough clearance to the edge. And as you can imagine, and as I'm illustrating, I'm not taking extreme measurements here, so extreme accuracy is not what we're calling for. It's just it has to look good and be functional. Now I'll set the drill bit about here, and on my stop, which is out of the frame here, but it's just a drill press, a quill stop, I'll just measure to give me about 2 inches of depth. And we're there. Yeah, a little bit more. Okay, so that will stop the drill at the same point each time. Rotationally, I'll manage it with this. This is a break for the table. So every time I come to a point that I want to set it to or drill it at, I lock the table so that it's not just the screw trying to hold the table in place, because then it could shift a little bit. I start at the 0 point, which you probably can't see, but it's 0. And as I laid it out, to get 12 holes in the outer ring, they're spaced at 30 degrees apiece. So now it's a simple matter of just drilling hole after hole. Another thing I want to point out, you probably saw, I'll unlock this, let's go to 60 now, add another 30 to it. I'm going to drill the next hole. You see when I come into it, I don't just jam the drill in, because we are in that angle. If I just do that, it'll try to make the drill skate. It'll want to go downhill and kind of wobble the hole out a little bit. So, and if you're having trouble seeing those holes, which is quite likely, I'll come up here. There we go. And let's bring you in a little bit, and I'll let you watch a couple of these holes get drilled. But the point is that I'm drilling these on an angle. So you don't want that drill to skate downhill until it establishes the point in the wood. And then once you do that, then you can start hogging them in fairly quickly. So let's do a couple. Okay, you see we got the last drill, or pardon me, last hole drilled. And now we're ready to do the inner ring. The placement of that again is what looks good. Somewhere between the outer ring hole and the center hole, so we put those there. Now, as you saw, hopefully, when I was showing you the completed units, the outer ring holes go in one direction, and the inner ring holes, like this one, will tip out this way. And you think, oh, now you got to trip the drill press table and arrange it differently. Well, no. You see I'm on this side of the center line with the outer ring holes. So I will position it for the inner ring holes by simply moving it forward towards me so that I'm on the other side of the center line. And that will automatically tip the holes. So a nice easy way out of that. And I will again position it a little bit on this side of the center line, display the brushes out a bit. Clamp this. Now you don't want this to slide off the drill press table, of course. And that looks like a good position for it. And that's all there is to it for positioning for the inner ring holes. Now I'm ready to do those. Now, to keep myself straight, I go to 0 point again, and these holes are stepped out at 45 degrees apart. They'll give you about the same physical spacing because your circle's smaller. So let's do that. Oh, that went fairly easy, as it should be. So, now I'm ready to take this out of this holder. When I maneuver things in and out like this, I like to take the drill bit out of the way. Be careful, it's probably a little warm. And then get the air hose here and blow it off gently, just so it's easier to work around. I'm not worried about cleaning those holes out yet. We'll do that later on the lathe because we got some turning yet to do. Again, just to keep myself straight, I always like to return this to 0, so I know I'm always starting the same place if I have another one to do, which I have. And back these holding screws out a little bit, and I can unscrew this, and we're ready to go back on the lathe. Well, we're back to the lathe. Got our piece still on the chuck. And we're going to put this back on. Turn the lathe on and get turning again. Now, the edges of these holes are not bad, and that often will depend on the wood that you've used for the top. But we'll make them even nicer now. So, put this back in position. Get my face shield back on. And I will tip you down just a little bit so you can get a better image of what I'm up to here. These cameras are always fun to play with when you're by yourself, but persevere here. And just a little better shot of it. Well, let's get going. Well, that certainly is part of it. You see I've put a little angle on that surface there. You might not be able to see it, but I did. It's angled down a little bit just to get a little more detail. What I'm going to do next, though, is take the tool rest out of the way. Just set it down here. I'm going to take that drill bit and put it in the chuck in my tailstock. Obviously, I'm at the point of putting this center hole in, so let's just do that. I've marked about 2-inch depth on the drill, so we should be good to go. Now, I like to blow it out, otherwise it starts really getting hot and roasting the hole. I'm drilling end grain poplar now, so I'll just like to give a nice crisp pull this way. It doesn't take too long though. That should do it. So now I got, this is the 21st hole, and so we got a 21 hole holder, and yes, I pulled the tailstock out of the way, but I'm still going to take this drill out because I've stuck my elbow in them too many times. So now I'm ready to make the next cut on the face. That will clean up these holes. And again, I'll go down a little bit, and that will help me with the last step, which when I'm turning the foot, I'll explain why this helps me. Okay, so those are the details I really wanted to show you. I'm going to turn the outside, put a little, some kind of detail to it, but you don't need to watch that. That's just another simple turning exercise. And then we'll put a coat of finish on it and let that cure. At that point, I'm going to pull you back in, and we'll talk about turning the foot. Okay, we've put a couple coats of finish on this thing, and now I'm ready to flip it around and put it on the other chuck and turn the foot. So let's do that. So now we're ready to turn the foot on this. We have to grab it by the top, and that's fairly easy to do here. But to make it easy, I've got another chuck set up with the cold jaws ready to go for that. That's this guy right here. Okay, you see I've got the grippers that I make on here. It just makes it so easy, and there's zero run out with these. So go ahead and put this guy on. Sits right down flat. Now that's what I mentioned before about why I put that cup-like detail on there. That gives me a nice semi-wide base. If I were to put a dome on here, then if I put it on in here, it would tend to want to try to rock. This here, with the flat on there, or the slight convex cup, it gives a nice 4-point stability to it. And then we could just tighten this up, crank it down pretty hard. Now we're ready to go. Now if you look carefully, and I'll try and bring you in on this, if you watch this surface, you see there it kind of wobbles in and out. And but if you check the surface here, there's no movement at all. It turns perfectly true. This is slightly on an angle because when these were cut off, it was done at the mill and they weren't super accurate about that. I didn't care because when I drilled the cup, the 2 1/8 inch Forstner bit hole for the jaws, the bottom of that hole is true to the rest of this. So that's why when I mounted it and turned it, everything was fine. It's just that when you come here, you see, okay, this is kind of wobbly. But that's what turning the foot does for you, of course, is chew all that up. So, let's put the tool rest up. Now in this case, I mean, certainly it's always true you want sharp tools, but in particular in this action, because we're going to be turning end grain, the grain is running this way. So yeah, you always want sharp tools, but particularly when you're going to do something like this. This is poplar, but it's still kind of tough, so it's good to have a really sharp tool. And I'm just using a nice little 3/8 bowl gouge. And I just put the edge back on, so we're ready to rock here. Okay. And now you can see that, yeah, everything's nice and trim now. Now I'm going to go and start rolling the edge off of this. Give myself about a 1/4 to 3/8 inch outer ring for the stability of the base. And it went fairly quick. It's amazing when you use a Forstner bit how much wood disruption occurs at the center point. You have to really turn down fairly far. So normally now I would start sanding this at like 100 grit just to establish that all the tear out's been accounted for. But I think, yeah, well, what I'm going to do next is show you the use of another tool. This is, again, one of the tools that I make. And you see that I've got this 1/8 inch bit, and I got a V point on there. And I'm going to just put 2 rings in the base, and I'll take it off and show you. But when you use a tool like this, either mine or anyone, where you're going to just use a plunge cut to establish some detailed rings, one point that is often overlooked and will end up with a particularly fuzzy edge to that detail is that when you plunge it in to the point you want, you let it dwell there for a second or two, so that there are several rotations without you moving the bit in. And that helps to shear off those little fuzzies that tend to otherwise want to hang on. That's about how hard that is. And just to show you what we've ended up with, I'll take this out and present it to the camera. And so now we've got this foot turned. The ring gives me a location where I like to put my signature, any other detail to identify the piece. But that's about that, and there's all those holes that we drilled earlier. And you can see what I mentioned before about putting a little detail on the side, nothing spectacular. I just play with whatever whim strikes me for the moment. And I'll probably hit this with 1000 grit, put a couple more coats on it, and finish up the foot, and this thing's good to go. Thanks for watching.